Happy New Year! It's the beginning of the year for the 32 teams in the NFL, the first day of the new league year, which officially kicked off just moments ago. It's the time that all of the free agency moves that have been discussed and agreed to in principle in the last couple of days during the tampering period or the negotiating period can actually go through. Though, as you know well by now, the biggest one is dead. Welcome to the SumerSports Show with Sam Bruckhouse. I'm Lindsay Rhodes. Lots of interesting moves to discuss that have reshaped teams around the league, but it's not often that we see a trade of the caliber of the Ravens-Raiders trade get to the point where it is announced and then pulled back. And I know everyone has lots of questions about how that happened and what happens now. And we happen to have a few people on staff with us at Sumer who have on the record perspective that they can share to shed some light on some of the issues surrounding this. Longtime front office executives and former general managers, Mike McCagnon and John Idzik, joining us now. Hello, gentlemen. What a week so far.
Hello, gang, and happy free agency.
Quick lay of the land before we get to the subject at hand that everybody wants to hear your opinions about here. The Raiders and Ravens agreed to a trade on Monday. Max Crosby to Baltimore in exchange for 2 first-round picks. This year's number 14 overall pick and a first next year. 2 days worth of free agency moves ensue. Raiders sign a ton of people. They commit a lot of cash. And then last night, a big announcement. The Ravens are backing out of the deal. Those are the Raiders' words, backed out. Reports come out that he did not pass his physical. Teams are not allowed to make deals final until today at 4. So all's fair. Crosby goes back to the Raiders. Raiders go back to square one. Ravens move on shortly thereafter and come to terms with Trey Hendrickson, another edge on the market, with a 4-year, $112 million deal. 2 big questions now. How did this happen? How is this allowed to happen? And what happens to the 2 teams in the wake of this? Primarily, I guess, the Raiders. I'd like to break this down into smaller points so we can better understand, starting with the physical. He had just had surgery 2 months ago. People around the league and reports have said he was never going to pass a physical. Mike, what is the physical looking for in a situation like this? And how much information does the team have about his medicals ahead of doing the physical?
Okay, so the way all trades work is with regards to the passing the physical. Usually that's like the final thing, even with contracts, and John's obviously well aware of this too. You have to pass the physical, and that sort of validates the contract or validates the trade. All those clauses are very routine in place. You have knowledge of the player's medical background pretty much up until basically the combine, or if he brought the guy in for a physical in the college draft final or pre-draft visits. So you don't really have access to all their medical data from his current career in the NFL. You obviously will request that information for your doctors for the physical when you actually facilitate the trade and you're trying to finalize the trade by finalizing the physical. So you have some knowledge. You have a history of injuries he may have sustained or dealt with over his course of his career, but you do not have all that sort of sensitive information about the player's medical history at the respective team that he's on. And you really don't get a chance to get your hands on them and run them through MRIs or whatever exams you want to run them through and have your doctors test all the joints and until you physically get them in your building in front of your people.
John, in your experience, I think I heard a report from somebody that said that that the Raiders would have sent some sort of like the medical information that they had prior to the physical, like all the information that they had. I don't know if that's MRIs or any information like that. In your experience, does that type of information go back and forth so that is, I guess that would fall under the description of what you said, Mike, about like all the medical information that they had up till that point?
Yeah, there's a medical history that you keep track of on the player, but as Mike said, until you get your hands on them, you don't know all the details. If the trade reaches the point of where it did with Baltimore and Vegas, then of course you're going to have your medical staff speak with theirs, and you may even trade some documentation. So you get a little bit more finer detail on the background, the medical background of the player. But then again, you still don't know until you lay hands on that player. And you get all, it may be something having to do with his recent knee procedure, or it may these, accumulation of things. And the tolerance of different type of medical condition varies by club. So what could be acceptable to one club, the trader club, may not be acceptable for the recipient. So you just don't know. And how this can happen, Lindsay, there's two aspects of it. Remember, we're in I think this is an oxymoron, the legal tampering period.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense to me. Either you're tampering or you're not. But so nothing is official until we get to 4:00 today and things, contracts are consummated, trades are actually finalized. Everything is kind of in abeyance. So that's one aspect of it. And certainly the other aspect of a trade, all trades have conditions on them. And the base condition is, will he pass our physical, not your physical, our physical. And until you get to that point, it's not done.
So I do want to ask a deeper question about what you said, the medical procedure that he had. Mike, in your experience, I believe it was a torn meniscus surgery that he had. Typically that's looked at as lesser than other knee procedures, and it's just more of a in the long-term discussion. What's your kind of view, just giving your time as a scout or your time as a general manager, getting that type of medical? What would you think the doctors would reply to you just about that?
Yeah, and I would say this doesn't really pertain to obviously Max, the Ravens, and the Raiders, because I'm not privy to all that information. A meniscus doesn't usually rate as high as a reconstruction or other issues, like if it's a spinal issue, as it's a disc issue. But a meniscus, usually what you find is, and a lot of NFL players have a lot of wear and tear in their knees, when they do have meniscus surgeries, they can have a flap tear, they can trim it, sometimes they'll cut it out. It correlates more, not necessarily to the structural integrity of the knee as much as it does to arthritis and other things that may cause swelling, inflammation, things that would cause the player not to be able to play or practice. So historically, more veteran players have been around for a while, have had some of these issues and you've dealt with. We've seen that all the time in the NFL when we brought players in for physicals and we're going to sign them and stuff like that. We do. And just to echo what John said earlier, I don't want to say necessarily, even though it's a lot of data involved in terms of making these decisions, they're still subjective decisions of what your level of comfort is. You may look at a contract with certain levels of money and guarantees, and you're expecting a certain return in terms of him being on the playing field. And if you feel he cannot fulfill or achieve that causes you, to subjectively decide, like your doctors may say, hey, we don't feel comfortable with this. And, that would not, negate or null and void the trade. But I would say with a meniscus, historically, again, I would say it's probably, and again, my background's not being an athletic trainer or a doctor, but I've sat in so many of these meetings over the years that tends to correlate more to sort of wear and tear, arthritic changes, stuff like that may cause him to miss playing time.
I want to go back to what, John, you said about the risk tolerance here and how comfortable they would feel passing somebody in a physical, and then also tie it to something that Mike just said there. First of all, I think how much subjectivity is there that is tied to the value of the deal? Is it like we've already decided that he as a player, if he's able to be on the field, is worth X number of, in this case, 2 first-round picks? And then the physical just decides, can he play and will he be able to play for those 2 years? Or is there I guess what I'm saying is like, is that risk assessment, does it involve subjectivity that goes with like, ooh, if this was a short deal, then yes, we would pass this because we think he could probably play for 1, but now we're looking down the line. Like, can you kind of walk me through whether or not it's just black and white, you get a medical yay or nay, or whether or not there is a little bit more context that's involved with that?
Oh, there's certainly more context involved, and that's where the GM comes into play. The GM is kind of, gathering information from medical. Obviously, they have the contract in hand, what they've agreed to, where the player is just from, a talent standpoint in his career. Is he peaking? Is he on the back nine, or does he still have very productive years? All that enters into ultimately what risk are we going to, to accept for this player. But certainly, Lindsay, if you were doing a 1-year deal, I think you would have a higher risk tolerance on the medical side than a multi-year deal. If you were doing a rather lucrative deal with an extended guarantee, well, then as an organization, you don't want to automatically sign up for something that could end up being dead in a year or two. So that certainly enters into the equation. But when you're just kind of leafing through the various silos of information, medical, stay with medical. Football, stay with football and our staff and where we're going to play him and how long we think he can play and at what levels. And then from a financial standpoint, you got to marry all that up. And in the end of the day, it may not be the meniscus, Sam, but it could be, as Mike said, degeneration in the knee. It could be something else that you're, maybe he's able to make it to week 1 in 2026 and maybe even plays through 2026. But if we're looking for 2 or 3 real years out of this via the structure of the contract, then you want your medical staff or your medical information basically to marry up with that, to say, okay, we think that he's going to be not only okay this year, but the degeneration, and I just use that as an example.
Yeah.
Degeneration in the knee won't affect him until 2-3 years down the line. All those factors do come into play, Lindsay.
Mike, what do you think that if you were a general manager of another team that was interested in him or maybe had been interested in him prior to them agreeing to a deal with the Ravens, is this automatically cause for concern for you that a different team did not pass him on a physical, or is this potentially something that they wouldn't do but is worth you going back and looking for? Like what can you read into that just on the surface?
Well, I would say, again, his market, and I'm not privy to how many teams and who was interested and at what level. But I would say he obviously has a market because he's a very good player. It would not necessarily cause you not to be interested or not to inquire. But of course, going forward, you would, if one team's already failed him on a physical, you're going to be, very upfront about the fact, hey, this, again, we're going to make sure our doctors feel comfortable with this going forward. So there should still be a market for the player, I would imagine. It may not, unfortunately, it could, in theory, affect the market, but until somebody gets them in their own building and takes a look at them, that's to be determined. I would say the one thing too, and John kind of touched on this a little bit, but when you're looking at, it's not just the deal and the amount of money and the guaranteed money and trying to think, okay, we want to, it's a business investment. So you start thinking, okay, this is what we want to get in return for what we're giving up. And of course, when you offer up draft picks, which have two aspects to them. One is the lower, in essence, value of the contract on an APY. If you get a really good caliber player in one of those picks that you get for a period of time on a rookie deal, obviously there's 2 of them, and both those picks you can go back and look historically of the success rate and how you see players, but you can also look at how much playing time those players would potentially have. So again, it's not a 7th round draft pick that you're just like, oh, okay, like we'll take a flyer on them. These are obviously significant picks. So I think the scrutiny you put it under is pretty intense. The other thing I would say, and again, John talked about silos, and you go through this process, and yes, the medical aspect has one silo and they have their opinion on it and they're tasked with their job. But you're probably doing background check on this player on your own. It's not as if you just sort of do these deals blindly. You're calling people that maybe you were in that organization, you have contacts with, media people, maybe you're calling former coaches, former staff members, and you're asking them, hey, about what was Max's, if you have a question on something medical, what was his playing history or practice history like? Did he miss time? Was he on the field a lot? Were there any issues with that? So there's a lot of things that go into it. And I think, it's a degree of complexity. And as John alluded to, I mean, you do a full body physical, you may find something that may not be the issue that's in the media. Who knows?
Right.
You don't.
Can
really
you
know.
share the medicals? Like the Ravens have now done this physical. Could they, or would they, or are there HIPAA rules involved with them actually sharing what they found with a potential team?
My personal opinion, I think there obviously are legal aspects of this because you're dealing with medical information on a player, and you do probably have to sign. And when you do this, you do sign releases and waivers and make sure that everything's done in the correct procedure. But there is a sensitivity to it, and that's why you don't, in essence, send everything everywhere, because in essence, you're putting a lot of very sensitive information out there. So it's not as if you just have, hey, there's 10 teams calling, I'll send his medical records to 10 teams, and without having any kind of deal in place or structure. So It is the NFL is very procedure oriented on this and very protective of, especially with the players union involved with this too. Like these are all rules and guidelines we abide by with the CBA. But there's a sensitivity to it. You are dealing with people and medical information, which there is there are HIPAA rules, and you have to honor and follow.
I guess what I'm getting at is it a given? Is it a for sure that another team would have to start at square one with this, or are there possible workarounds where like he could sign off and say send them everything that you have, because everyone, including him, it's in their best interest to kind of expedite anything that would happen at this point, right?
Well, once the Ravens are out of the trade, they're kind of out of the process in theory. Now they may off the cuff share information. Again, I don't know. Like, I don't know if that's something I would personally advise my people to do. I'd probably be like, hey, this is, if you're interested, talk to the Raiders and coordinate with them. But I think it's, again, there's a sensitivity to the information. I think we're very careful of in the NFL, and I would assume John has had experience or knowledge of this too.
There could be a liability too, right? If you are attaching something.
Yeah, I mean, you're dealing with people. I mean, it's again, we are. Again, these are very serious things, and you're dealing with people and players and careers, and it's not that it's really not for media's consumption or in the public, and even quite frankly from team to team. Again, I'm not going to say that people don't talk in the business. But I think I would feel very uncomfortable if a team called me and say, hey, can you send me all your stuff on him, when he really wasn't our player. We just brought him in for a potential trade they were trying to execute.
I think there's both legal and ethical aspects to that. And you just have to respect for the player's privacy. As Mike mentioned, there's HIPAA rules in place. But, certainly somebody like the player could say, hey, I'm going to sign off on the release of my medical information or my physical. Yep. Could you please forward it to Club B? I've had that happen before. So it's, I think that's got to come from the player ultimately.
Is this a situation? I know everybody, this feels anomalous. This does not happen frequently. This is always on the table to happen. That's why during this, and you said you don't like the phrase legal tampering period, nor does the NFL, which is why at NFL Network for many years, we were instructed to not call it that on the official shows. It was the legal, like the negotiating period or something like that. They don't use tampering.
Very nice. Very nice. It's like that tall, short guy, legal tampering.
But everybody obviously always says that these deals that are reported for a period of 2 days are pending a physical, right? Like, so that disclaimer is always out there, but it's really infrequent that you see something this big kind of get pulled off the table. It has happened before, though. Can you guys think of other instances where this has happened, or is there a frame of reference that you guys have for?
I don't think it's quite as unusual as you may think, Lindsay. It's just this one is so visible. That this is this is one of the most sought after, a very talented guy. So a blockbuster trade, so to speak. So it doesn't happen that often at that level, because you're going to do, as Mike said, you're going to drill down and do as much research, background, medical, everything that you can on a transaction of that magnitude. So that's why it doesn't happen that often. But there are plenty of trades that aren't consummated for medical reasons as well as other reasons. That happens in the league. You just don't hear about it as often.
Yeah, definitely. The lower profile players, usually it's a little blurb in the media and it moves on. So it's not as, hey, this trade fell through and whatever. But generally a late round pick or something like that. I think as John alluded to, like the focal point of not only the compensation, the player, but also at this stage in free agency where this trade impacts both those teams in terms of the salary cap and what their plans are and what they're doing. Now, obviously, the Ravens pivoted, signed a good player, and didn't have to give up compensation for him in terms of draft capital. So that is some benefit to them, I would think.
Yeah, Lindsay, I think the only one that comes to mind in terms of a failed medical that kind of affected both teams would be the Drew Brees signing in Miami. Then he goes to New Orleans. This is something that happens a lot more in basketball with respect to trades, but typically that's happening mid-season when those players have 30 and 40 games and travel on their back. Typically, this doesn't happen in basketball during the offseason. Like two come to mind, the Mark Williams and Dalton Connect trade, which caused problems in the NBA a year or two ago. And then there was a big blockbuster trade with Tyson Chandler years and years ago. But those are mid-season trades. I think the particular uniqueness of this one is that it's an off-season trade months after Max Crosby, who was basically shut down at the end of the year,
against his will.
Right,
Which
exactly.
Is another layer to all of this. Remember, he's like out there trying to prove he could play. So it's almost ironic that this is the conversation we're having about him at this point.
Right.
It's interesting. We do a lot of trades in terms of draft picks and during the draft. Like that happens and people move around and they're draft picks. Player trades are not quite as, again, I don't really want to say this is factually correct, but my impression comparing us to other leagues, we don't seem to trade quite as much. Everybody talks about the trade deadline. Everybody hypes up all this, whatever. It's a great media talking point for like 2-3 weeks. And then when push comes to shove, there isn't quite, big shifts in players amongst the NFL teams during the in-season trade period. But of course, now there obviously is a lot of focus on it. But when you go through this process, it'll be interesting. So if Max stays with the Raiders, that will play out one way. If Max gets traded to another team and they pass him on the physical and facilitate the trade, again, not to say that means anything. I mean, Baltimore's entitled to their own opinions. Because again, and as John alluded, one of the things I'll mention when you go through this process on the medical side, and especially with the draft, really we do this extensively with the draft players. When we get their combine results or we bring them in for a physical, people have to remember, like when you go get an MRI or you get some scan done, they have doctors that read the scan and it's their interpretation of the scan, and to a degree, them from their medical history and background. And the other thing plays into this, and I think, I don't want to say I'm not trying to paint it as being overly subjective because these are obviously professionals and very skilled in what they do. But if you are a general manager, as John alluded to, and you've had something go wrong in the past, and you're the final say of taking all this input and saying, do we stay with the player? Do we draft the player? Do we facilitate the trade? Those are things that kind of fall out on your desk that you have to decide in the end, and you have to make what you believe is the best decision for the organization going forward with the information you have at hand. But again, those doctors will basically put the player through a physical. They'll put their hands on the joint. They'll kind of feel if it's loose or tight. That's part of their skill and what they do. But they also have people who read the radiology stuff and kind of see what they did, how they determine if they think it's, good or bad. So that's kind of how it comes down to. I mean, behind the scenes, I should say.
How does a general manager approach free agency, knowing that a trade during the negotiating period could always get pulled back, that something like this could happen? I know this is a big question that people have had about the Raiders. Like, are they screwed? They went out, they spent all this money, and now they have his money coming back, and they might not be able to deal him again. Do you have to essentially, as a general manager, when you make a deal on day one of the negotiating period, have two plans that you move forward with? One, if this if this one works out, and one, if this doesn't? How do you operate?
Yeah, it's always about alternatives, Lindsay. So you can't, especially when you're dealing with something that is not finalized yet, until the ink is dry on the paper and the players in your building, you can't bank on that. That's, if the league has taught us anything, and today has taught us anything, that happens. So you always have to have contingency plans in place. Okay, if this happens, if this goes through, this affects our cap this way, our depth at these positions, our draft outlook, both this year and going forward. There's a domino effect of sorts with that. But you always have to have, and I never assumed anything was done until it was done. And it may sound silly. Everyone's in agreement. Everything's cool. The player's on his way. But until he shows up in the building, you always lean on those contingency plans.
So you'd be surprised if the Raiders spent money that they didn't have, essentially. Like, there's no need to go back and reassess any of these deals.
Now, remember, some of that money is kind of monopoly money too. It was done in the negotiating period, right? So in theory, if they spent some money on some handshake agreements that has not been consummated yet, and something happens to, grossly affect their cap, and they can't follow through, they can say, thanks, but no thanks too. So, again, until the ink is dry, yeah, you don't know what you're dealing with. You have to deal with absolutes.
How does a deal like this being pulled back at the 11th hour change options for the team that has the player, like in this case, the Raiders? Is it impossible to get the same for him 2 days later at the end of free agency? Or are we inevitably looking at, if they were to continue to try and shop him around, has the price now inevitably gone down? Or am I making an assumption that is not necessarily fair, Mike?
I would say it's if the best. I mean, in theory, they did the best deal they felt for the player. I would imagine when they did the deal with the Ravens in terms of compensation. It doesn't necessarily automatically say, okay, you've just lost a lot of leverage in this process. Where you lose leverage is if teams who may have been interested, again, Max Crosby's off the table. He's going to Baltimore. Okay, so now we're going to go pivot, and because you can't sit idly by and you can't wait for to expect maybe the trade won't work out. Like, you have to be actively moving forward. It doesn't necessarily mean that they will not have as much leverage, or they may not get as good of a deal as they felt they got with the initial one. But I think the risk is, and the reality of it is as fewer players are in the marketplace as potential trade partners, it's a simple, again, it's supply and demand. It's a lever. It's like anything in Econ 101. If there's a market out there that is driving, being competitive, because we're all competitive in this business, and we're trying to either win the deal or sign the player or trade for the player. That's where something like this may, just because suitors may have left the marketplace, they may have said, okay, well, we're out, we're going to go a different direction because we got our needs to go fill and stuff like that. That's the risk you run. Again, every team's going to be, going to look at Max, and they're going to be in their mindset, hey, if we can have our doctors look at him, we'll make our own determination if we feel comfortable with whatever, him passing a physical or not. But I do think that's where you run into it a little bit. Like, as time goes by, everybody in the marketplace starts filling and moving forward. And okay, we can't re-enter that because we've already allocated our resources somewhere else.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. John, I know that you have someplace else that you need to be, so I'm going to go ahead and let you go. I have one more question that I want to ask Mike. Thank you so much for your time, John. Really appreciate it.
All right.
Mike, the fallout from this for the Ravens, and by the way, we're going to hear from Eric DaCosta at 5 Eastern, so coming up in a little bit less than a half an hour. And everybody has just been throwing a bunch of scenarios and hypotheticals, and people are running with it right now. There's information that we just don't have. If they did decide that for whatever reason, like the word cold feet has been thrown around, right? Like, which they have the right to, I guess, pull this deal back. There's a lot of subjectivity in the physical. There's lots of things that they don't even necessarily need to tell us about. But here's where my question is. If people around the league have questions and they don't know if they're hearing the answers that make them feel comfortable, do the Ravens now have to do some work to convince other general managers that they should do business with them in the future? Like, from a PR standpoint, they don't need to explain why they did this in any detail. And a lot of the physical stuff and the medicals is private. But do they, in your opinion, have to explain some things maybe in private to different clubs so that teams aren't wary about doing business with them in the future?
Yeah. I would say this, that what happens a lot in this, I'm going to answer this question in a couple different ways. And having sat in a general manager's chair, it's a different position than pretty much any other position in the business when you're working your way up. And what you realize is you're dealing with the media, and you're dealing with everything you do, transactionally or decision-making wise, becomes a story, And so a lot of times I think reporters are tasked with, obviously, gathering the facts, writing articles. Some of them are, more like, hey, this is how it went down. Other people write editorials. And I think everybody wants to get kind of cause and effect, so it's like, hey, what was the story? What really happened behind the scenes? And I would say simply this: the people that probably really know that are a very small circle of people at a very high level, because these are decisions. You don't make this decision and, with 50 people in the room. You're making these decisions with very few people in the room. So first and foremost, I'm always a little cautious to say, okay, let's not run down this rabbit hole because this is how the narrative perceives. So in fairness to both teams involved, obviously primarily Baltimore, they're the ones who facilitated a trade and then didn't pass the physical when, and didn't feel comfortable. And in fairness, they're perfectly entitled to that, because until that physical is passed by that team, then the trade is not facilitated. The second thing I think you run into a little bit with this is that when you go into these kind of environments, like, the one thing, it's a small industry. Okay. There's not a lot of people. There's only 32 general managers. There's only 32 staffs. And I think at some point in time, this will come up in conversation. And I think in fairness, and John kind of alluded to this before, nothing's done until it's done, and deals can fall through at the 11th hour, at any given point in time. And most of the time you never hear about in the media, whether you're making a trade for a draft pick and you have an agreement, and then, then at the last minute, the GM from the other team calls up and say, "Oh, our player's a player that we didn't expect is going to be there on the board. We're going to go take the player." And you don't report that in the media because it's just minor little things that happen inside the day-to-day function. But I would say, it'll probably come up in conversation. I would say the next time deals are done, I'm sure everybody's going to be, hey, let's figure out the exact timeline. We'll facilitate it on our end to get you all the information you need. But I don't necessarily think anybody has to go around and sort of explain or this or that. It'll probably work itself out in conversations. I do think we're in a very public arena that everybody's looking for a narrative. Everybody's looking for the reasons behind things. And I think again, as a general manager, you have to deal with the PR aspect of it, and you have to go out there and, report the information from how it transpired on your end. The other team's going to do it on their end, and you go from there. I don't know if that makes sense, but again, I don't know if I'd be, again, you're going to have a lot of conversations. As it plays itself out, time will tell. Like if Max gets traded and somebody else, again, finalizes the trade, then everybody's going to go back and it'll be another story that'll come up again, and at some point in time. But in fairness, if Baltimore didn't feel comfortable with the trade, if I was a GM and I wouldn't feel comfortable at the 11th hour, even though everything was set. I mean, there was a situation when I was a general manager, we brought a player in, a high profile player that we liked quite a bit. We knew he had medical issues coming out of college. I mean, just, wear and tear kind of stuff. And even though we were really excited about possibly signing the player, at the end of the day, when we went through this process, our doctors didn't feel comfortable. And that was not a great thing to do, to have to tell a player we'd been recruiting and him and the agent and suddenly be like, hey, we can't go forward with this. It's not and it becomes a PR story, and you go from there. And you mentioned the Drew Brees thing before. Like I know from my time with the Texans, there was Drew and another player that, would have been potentially on the expansion draft. But again, not unlike what happened in Miami, if you don't feel comfortable, you have to, you can't, you have to listen to your people. And in, both the scenarios that I've been in, all the teams I've been around, I've been around excellent medical doctors and staff, and they're really good at what they do. And as I mentioned before, a lot of these guys you'll examine the player, you'll look at, again, they'll run them through MRIs, and you'll have people that will analyze that. And I've sat in rooms where the doctor's more or less showing me an MRI of like, hey, this is where we're concerned. This is showing up as a hotspot. This is arthritis. This is going to be it's bone on bone, or whatever the case may be. And you start getting into those things, and not that I'm not a doctor, but you do get exposed to a lot of stuff that helps you make those decisions.
You're very level-headed about this, Mike, which I fully appreciate. But I think a lot of people are emotional, and a lot of people are like,
"Oh, they are."
If you screw over my friend Sam, now I'm not going to do business with you because you screwed over my friend Sam, and Sam told me a story, and his whole free agency plan was thrown for a loop, and then you changed your mind, and I know there are people in the NFL that are like that, right? Like, I mean, to a degree, obviously, 50,000 foot view, you're like, you can be very rational about it, but everybody has relationships. And so
it's again, as I said, it's a very small industry. So it's like what goes, again, people know, people talk, and no, I would say that the thing is this, it's the job is so intense and so stressful. And that when you do this, again, you get emotional. Everybody gets emotional. emotional. It's an emotional game. You watch the people play it. You watch the players play. You watch the coaches on the sideline. You go to practice. I mean, you see everybody, and again, it's a zero-sum game, so it's very intense. It's very, very, very intense. And not to say that I'll get angry and whatever, but I think the problem ends up being if you're not privy to all the internal information that goes on inside, and maybe that's what I know. Like I've been in those, not just things like this, but you've been in so many decisions and processes and this and that, and then sometimes what you see gets reported in the media. You kind of go, sometimes they get it right, and sometimes you think, oh, they don't have it right, but they're kind of writing a narrative or a story to the event, and they don't. Maybe they have some information or a little bit of the information or all the information, but that's kind of how it works, And I'm sure Eric will be hanging, Eric, who knows? I mean, hanging out at the combine with, John, or I don't know, like I'm sure they're not probably happy right now, but I mean, in the end of the day, like in fairness, hey, if the deal's not done till, I's are dotted and T's are crossed, that's how it works.
Mike, really appreciate your perspective. Thank you very much for sharing your experience with us.
Yeah, no problem, guys. Happy to help and happy to share a little bit of some of that from an experience standpoint. And maybe I'm a little too reserved, but again, I've seen so much happen in the league. It's like, good Lord, and you know about a whole bunch of stuff that never makes it out to the media, and you're just like, it's part of the business.
Stuff that would shock us, apparently, if you're like, this happens. Because I think all of us collectively looked at our phones and freaked out last night. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Sam, I will be very interested to see what Eric DaCosta says in about 18 minutes from now. It sounds like there are definitely going to be people around the league like Mike and like John that approach this with a very measured approach. I think that there's a human factor here that people will just want to understand. And again, like in a different set of circumstances where a team's approach isn't impacted, then maybe that's totally different. If you're just talking to a free agent and an agent and you pull that back. But in this case, there's a whole free agency plan that's potentially affected. Although it sounds like from what John said, which I appreciated him laying out, like you go into this knowing that, you can't count your chickens before they're hatched. So the Raiders should have done that.
Yeah. And I think the most interesting part of this is that it's my takeaway from John and Mike's insight was that this is definitely tied to the medical. This is not we're pulling out because Trey Hendrickson became available at this price and we didn't think he's going to be available at this price. It may be related to that, but it's more of, we had Max Crosby valued at this value based on the medical. We now have him at this value. And so that I think is a pretty considered, measured, understood plan of attack, particularly if this was unexpected, which it seems as if it was. So I think the main takeaway is that, these medicals like really matter. And there's a lot of voices coming in. There's a lot of data coming in. And at the end of the day, the Ravens probably made a decision, whether it was or whether it was not related to the availability of who was on the market, in particular, Trey Hendrickson, that Max Crosby maybe this year was not at risk, but in 2 or 3 years was not going to be the defensive player of the year guy that they thought they were trading for 2 first-round picks, and that the value had substantially decreased. And I think that's a really interesting conundrum that I hadn't really considered coming in, just thinking of it about, the assets in and the assets out versus what they have now.
See, I'm not convinced that it's not that they got cold feet or that it wasn't related to the price dropping for Trey Hendrickson. But I think that this is a situation where we'll never know for sure, right? Because there is a physical with subjectivity, and some teams will pass people that other people won't pass, and all of the different things that go on top of that. Like, it's not just a yay or nay that you get from the doctor. It's not like, whether somebody can play on Sunday and the doctor just says, yes, he's okay to play, or no, he's not okay to play. There's a timeline. There is a degeneration. There is subjectivity that you're putting to the reading of the information that you're getting back. So that kind of gives them an out, which is what I think is so interesting about this, in the sense that it muddies the waters, because we may literally never know what ultimately pushed them over the edge. I think the fact that Trey Hendrickson was available and that they they had a backup plan is definitely a part of this story at the very least, right? So I don't know. I mean, I don't even know if Eric DaCosta answers that, if we could just take that at face value. I just think that this is a really tricky situation because there are so many layers to it. What I do think is interesting too, though, is like what happens with the Raiders now. Like, does he come back? Do they continue to shop him? Where is the bar? Because if you got 2 1s for him in this deal, then where is the, like, let's say that's the high bar. Where's the low bar where the cost benefit still tips in favor of trading him and getting that pick? Because I don't know about the Raiders, but I know I had already spent that 14. Like, I'd already planned their draft, And so, I mean, I know that we talked about them having 2 different plans. So you have one where you do have the number 14 pick and then one where this all falls apart and you don't. But I bet they went through the last couple of days thinking, okay, and we'll tackle that position at 14.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know, that becomes an interesting part of this conversation too. Just for discussion. I don't know that we know an answer. By the way, I like the like film noir that's happening right now with the sun going down and the blinds on your face.
Yeah, I forgot about the time change messing my lighting up. So I'm gonna have to fix it here shortly. But I think that is the big question from the data science perspective, is like valuation. What is now the valuation of Max Crosby in terms of draft compensation? Because fundamentally it has to have gone down, right? Like, a market is not made by true value. A market is made by bidders. And so who would bid to first? Obviously the Ravens were the highest bidder. What were all the other bids? Are those down? Like, the valuation perspective of this is very interesting, despite, if you were to ask me as a data scientist, like, what is his valuation based on a torn meniscus? Like, just based on the sheer paper data that you get directly from the NFL, I wouldn't have said it was much lower. So I think there's like a lot of inside baseball valuation, like Mike said, stuff that never gets reported in this, that like can critically affect at least the way this offseason goes.
Let's pivot to the off-season at large, the free agency period, because this has been the biggest story and certainly the one that has the most for us to sink our teeth into. But there are a lot of big moves that have been made and some teams that have been very active. We have a list of the teams here who have been the top 5 in terms of spending in the last couple of days. The Titans look at how much money they've handed out, man, lots and lots of money and 11 contracts. The Raiders, one of these teams also, I mean, they've made a lot of moves on the defensive side of the ball in particular. The Titans also, that secondary is essentially redone. The Carolina Panthers, my brain goes to the defensive signings there too. We've got a lot of defenders that are getting picked up here and getting some big contracts. The Commanders have spent a lot of money. I don't know that they've changed the face of their team all that dramatically. So that's an interesting one on this list. But they are on here also. And then the Saints, your New Orleans Saints, Sam, having handed out 6 contracts with a value of $165 million for them. Going back to the Raiders for just a second, because I do think that their whole free agency has been very interesting. They obviously got Linderbaum and spent a lot of money on that, on him, and went top of market at the center position. What do you think that their free agency moves were pointing towards for that number 14 pick in the draft? Like, based on the boxes that they'd already checked, what do you think they were pushing us towards?
Yeah, I think especially now that you have Max back in house, it has to be pointing to the wide receiver position, in my opinion, where it's like, where are the holes on this team? I could also foresee it being at in the secondary, but like, you now have 2 linebackers, and that was considered a strength of just draft. And in particular, Sonny Styles was expected to go around that area. So like, I think that's locked up now, but everything to me is pointing to the wide receiver position, especially with understanding that they have Colton Miller, who for the most part last year was extremely good until he was kind of left off due to injury. And who knows like how long he was kept out due to injury, in quotes, given what we know about Max Crosby. So it seems as if it's geared towards attacking positions that they felt as if they could get quality players and not necessarily go in a place where they would have to draft for need at the next level. So the double linebacker signing, that's the one I think to highlight there of like, yeah, there's a ton of good linebackers in this draft. You get good linebackers free agency though. The center, adding Linderbaum, obviously, I think that makes a big difference as well, where it's like, yeah, we could go out and get a premium interior offensive lineman, or we could just pay for it and limit our variance there, given we have a rookie quarterback. So I think that it mostly points to the wide receiver position, especially given there should be a range of 3 to 5 guys that are going to be available at 14. But now that kind of changes. On the bright side, they have the number 1 pick. So should they, there's not really most of their value was going to get from number 1 anyway in this draft.
Well, for sure. But because they have number 1, I can't get over the fact that I think that and this was my thought process with regards to them trading Max in the first place. Like, I've spent the last few years, like, we have fun putting them on different teams when these conversations have come up, bless you. But also, like, he's a Raider. So the reason that I was able to flip my brain this offseason was because they're bringing in a quarterback at number 1. And I think that their entire priority needs to shift. Like, ideally, you want the offense and defense to be good, but all of your assets have to go into protecting Fernando Mendoza and the investment that you're about to make at number 1. You need a line in front of him. You need pass catchers. You already have Ashton Jeanty. You've got Brock. Like, you need that wide receiver, and you need a front. And if you don't have a front, it's like you're just wasting a year, and you're possibly like rolling the dice that you're messing up Fernando. So to me, I'd kind of gone like, if a specific tackle that like looks good there that can really bulk up their line at 14, or a wide receiver that you can plug in there. Those were the 2. Now that you take that pick out and you're just waiting until the second round, you're not going to get a tackle, at least not the kind that we're talking about at the start of the second round. So it just changes the whole draft conversation for them, I think. If we're looking at them not having a first this year. And I wonder how married they became to the concept of we need that first, and whether or not I did have to scrap 73 mock drafts, but I spelled draft with an T. Drafts. Matt stops gear. Producers having fun behind the scenes. Let's bring in another voice here to kind of shift our gears. We've focused a lot on the Raiders and the Ravens for obvious reasons. Let's bring in Sean Syed, who has also been scanning the free agency landscape and has had a few moves that have stood out to him. You, of course, look through your scheme lens and are very familiar with all the offensive and defensive units around the league and like what they like to do, and maybe in some of the ways that they weren't able to do what they ideally wanted to do this year. I'm curious about what you noticed in free agency, Sean, that you think, oh, that makes sense. They'll be able to be much more this thing that they want to be next season.
A move I liked was the Cincinnati Bengals signing former Chief safety Brian Cook, because if you turn on last year's Bengals defense film, you're going to see missed tackles, poor angles, and a lot of things that you just don't see when you watch Brian Cook play football. And look, missed tackles have been a problem for the Bengals, certainly last year, but even going back 2 years, like that first game against the Patriots. And Cook is a versatile safety. He can play a lot of different techniques and has showed that off in Kansas City. Now you go and have a pretty big role here with the Bengals, where the Bengals have DJ Turner at cornerback. And I really do like him as a player. I think more people are going to learn about him this year. Of course, you add Boye Mafe on the edge. You get a little bit of a Super Bowl tax there, but you're hopefully just raising the floor of a team who was just not good enough on defense last season. You're saying we have a quarterback, an offense we believe in. We can get a little bit better here on defense. Let's go make something happen here in 2026.
Yeah, not for nothing, Lindsay. Looking at the numbers of Mafe and Cook, it's kind of around what we expect Trey Hendrickson to get. Now, Trey Hendrickson is allegedly going to get $60 million guaranteed. I do not think that's going to be like the 2-year all-in number. I would expect it to be more around like 35 to 40, but I'm keeping a close eye on that. But you look at the value of these 2-3-year contracts, and it ends up being around $33 million APY on the top level. And, you know, you got Hendrickson coming in here at just underneath that. So the cost savings kind of match up with the scheme, as Sean said.
It's an interesting time of year, right? Like when we can put together all of these draft conversations that we just had for a whole week at Combine, talking about what teams needed and how they can attack that in that sense. And then also the gaps that they decide to plug in this way. Sean and Sam, it feels like there's a conversation every year about position groups, Sam, that are best to fill in free agency versus the draft. What are the ones that have you noticed anything with regards to the moves that have been made in that sense? Like this makes sense that you would go pay up at this position because you can do something different in the drafts. Like in terms of the smartest approaches, what do you think people need to keep in mind right now?
Yeah, I think the highlight positions for free agency are going to be guard, running back, safety, linebacker. We've seen various teams hit all of those. I think Brian Cook is an excellent example of that, probably the premier safety on the market. I believe Kevin Byard has also signed to the Patriots. That's why you're seeing those guys move. But in particular, the interior offensive line, I think, makes a big difference. In particular, because we've seen basically two teams kind of pull themselves up as a result of this. We've seen the Panthers do this 2 years ago, where all of a sudden, they spend a lot of money on interior offensive line and it ends up working out. And to a certain degree, we kind of saw the Patriots do this to a certain degree, where they're drafting guards, they're bringing in Morgan Moses, moving people over the guard position. But I think free agency is the time to build up the interior. And I think you got to look at the New Orleans Saints as the team that is doing this. They have two tackles that they believe in. And now you bring in David Edwards from the Bills, who I believe was part of probably the best or the top 5 offensive line over the past 3 years, certified, was a core member of that. And now the Saints have an offensive line that for the most part is cheap. They're spending most of their money on the interior with the centers and the guards. You build through the tackles through the draft. And I think that's the best way to build an offensive line. So guards, linebackers, safeties, running backs, but in particular, we've seen teams see success when they spend a lot of money at offensive guard.
Sean, I'm curious if you have, and I feel like every time I use the word trends, you kind of cringe a little bit. Like it's not the way that you look at the league. I totally understand that. But we talked a lot at Super Bowl not Super Bowl Combine, with various people about like roster building kind of concepts and whether or not we would see any, like, obviously there was a lot of talk about tight ends because of the multi-tight end packages that we saw talked about quite frequently at the end of last year. In particular, safety was a position that people mentioned in the draft to kind of keep our eye on because of the way that you would fit that from a defensive standpoint. Have you noticed anything in free agency that feels like a trend to you? And it's fine if the answer is no, but is there anything that you think kind of points us to like we maybe are going in this direction? Or do you think free agency, also fair, isn't the place where we learn those things?
Yeah, I do think there's a little bit, like if you look deeply, you could say, well, the league is maybe, you're like, you have a role for these kind of more run-stoppy type players. Of course, pass rush is always going to be at a premium, but a guy like Kyrus Tonga in Kansas City, I think that as the league continues to move, not like a full swing, but it is still important from a roster building perspective. Like you want to have guys that are able to stop the run, not that you're going to be able to, build these massive, like top of the market type, like careers by just being an interior run stopper. I do think that's important. I also think it matters more on like a team to team basis. So seeing a guy like Johnny Mundt end up with the Eagles, like this is to me a really, really big signal where they had a lot of issues with their tight end blocking last season. And they're bringing a guy in that he is going to put people in the ground like that. He's a veteran in this league. He has done it for a while. He's going to continue to be able to do that. So I think those are kind of interesting things to see, where I'm always looking at those small things, because I still look at free agency, I think most people do, as like you're either making up for some of like, hey, I missed this position in the draft over and over, or like you're trying to add complements. You're trying to fill in those holes where hopefully like they're finishing pieces as opposed to really rebuilding things, because teams also do a good job of saying, all right, well, this guy's going to get a massive bag next year. Let's extend him now. Like Jalen Phillips with the Eagles, I think if he was there earlier, that's probably a situation that Howie Roseman would have loved to extend him early. Hey, let me get this deal in before he really kind of hits that market. So free agency, always interesting. I think you point those like fun little pieces, like Tyler Algier, my guy, Tyler Algier, ending up with the Cardinals. You can just point directly to it. Like this is a guy who runs outside zone at a high level. He knows where he needs to be, when he needs to be. Cardinals are totally full, I assume, going to go from last year where you're running a ton of gap scheme. Now you have more of that zone type approach. Get Tyler Algier. Like, that just makes a lot of sense. So seeing some of those things is always fun in free agency.
Tyler Algier, very like, I don't know that I would say under the radar, but like a really good running back who doesn't have huge production numbers, but always executes well. He's like a good SumerScore type of guy that isn't necessarily a standout fantasy player. Speaking of the Cardinals, though, we have a question about their quarterback here. Any thoughts on where they might be looking to go with the guy to put in that backfield with him?
Me and Sean are both just like smiling because they're like, yeah, it'd be great if they had someone. I think it's tough.
I mean, this is Jacoby Brissett erasure. Jacoby Brissett, this guy's throwing like 50, 60 passes in multiple games last season. You know,
are they fine? Because that's been the report.
I think that the Cardinals' time horizon is probably a little bit different than wanting to be like top of the division next season. So I think that I assume
like
they're probably
phrase that.
Probably gonna ride with it. Yeah,
that was a nice way of saying what I think we all know what you were saying, and Stopsky essentially put on the screen.
Gardner Minshew, capable.
He's
can I interest you in Ken in Slovis, Sam? I think he's
you can definitely interest me in that. I mean, like it's just interesting because it's like it seems like they tried. It seems like they tried to get guys, and it just didn't work out for one reason or the other. I guess we'll get news about that at a later date. But to his point, like Brissett was starting games and not killing them for most of the games. Now, what a statement.
Brissett was slinging it. He was slinging it.
Yeah, it's like a lot of people there was a time in the year in which we were like, is Jacoby Brissett better than Kyler Murray? And like the data just does not support that. But it does support over the years that he can come in and like he can probably realistically start you 17 games and be like, I don't want to say competitive, but your players won't get hurt. And so like it's sounding like
Put
I'm
that
like,
on a t-shirt.
Yeah, it's saying like I'm like providing like
your
such
players
a baseline,
won't get hurt.
But like he can provide an element of competitiveness that I think the Cardinals want to achieve. And I think that's why it's showing up in their win total of 4.5, which is like the lowest in the league of what kind of this team plans to do. Who knows though? Who knows?
Sean, thank you so much. Really appreciate your perspective as always. The Cardinals, Sam, are a really interesting one to pivot us to the quarterback conversation that we've sort of just touched on there. Right. Is an interesting one this offseason that, peeling back the curtain for people who are watching now, Sam and I have gone back and forth about Malik Willis quite a bit offline. And I think that that's the perfect example of the way I've described the quarterback situation this offseason is that this is a game of musical chairs and someone will not have a chair, right? Like in terms of there are more teams that need quarterbacks than there are obvious quarterbacks who are ready to fill those roles. And so that, in my opinion, is the value that's attached to Malik Willis, is that he is this year's guy that is a full dart throw. Like we don't know. We've never seen it in an extended way, but he is, of all of the options that we're scanning the whole landscape, everyone that was a backup next year, like where's our best option that might maybe work out as a starter? It feels like he's the one that we've settled on. Like, you're the guy, we're going to give you a shot. And so then he gets relatively a lot of money, but still it's a low-end starter salary.
Yeah, I think the thing that I'm most confused about is like where this market came from. Because there are exactly two people who have active contracts that are around 7% of the cap. It is him and Justin Fields. And so, like, is this just going to be the market of a long distribution guy who also, we're not really trying to win this year, so it'll make its way out, and like we need to spend money anyway? Maybe, but it's just unclear, particularly with regards to Willis, where like Willis's standard deviation, he could be substantially better than Justin Fields, and but he also could be substantially worse because we just haven't seen him start at all.
Right.
Like the only, ironically, like same team, and it makes a lot of sense, but like the only player that comes to my head that's ever been like, we are paying this guy again, like not a ton of money, but that's considerable amount of money.
It's
who
a
was
ton
a
of money to
backup-
you and me, not to a team paying a quarterback.
Correct. It's on the lower end of people who you would expect to start, but it is substantially higher than the amount we've seen Sam Darnold get, Baker Mayfield get, Teddy Bridgewater. Like there's a long, and there's reasons for that as compared to Malik Willis, but those guys actually started. So it's like, I'm just trying to wrap my head around like how this isn't similar to Matt Flynn, which was a Packers guy and the same kind of admin. The Seahawks like wanted to be competitive. I don't know how competitive the Dolphins actually want to be, but it's just like the development of this market is interesting to me because it feels like for what they wanted, you could just pay a lot less. And I think that's
I don't think they could. I don't think they could. And that's just because it is because of the market. If it was a different year and there was one team that needed a quarterback and they were the only one and they looked around and they're like, it's us or nobody, buddy. Like, here, take it or leave it. Because the other names that you just mentioned were people that were in, I think, different situations when they got paid the amounts that you're referencing. Like Baker Mayfield made $4 million his first year in Tampa Bay, but he was coming off a year where he'd been cut by the Panthers. So he was already on his second team. That did not work out. Had to go to, Los Angeles. There's like, a good game, but like, that's about it. And now you're signing him, but it's a like full dart throw, right? Like you're not expecting anything because it didn't work out in Carolina the year before. And then Sam Darnold was essentially signed by Minnesota. He made $10 million that first year, but they were signing him to be the backup. They drafted JJ McCarthy in the first round. The only reason he even gets on the field is because McCarthy is hurt and something happens. And otherwise we would never even know about Sam Darnold because JJ McCarthy was having a great preseason. Like that was his job to lose and he just got hurt. And so Sam gets an opportunity, but that was a backup deal. In this case, you're bringing somebody in specifically. And a bridge deal is not the right way to phrase it because there's a possibility this isn't a bridge, but I think it's kind of structured to be a bridge. Like worst case scenario, you're a bridge. You just get us to someone else. It's a 3-year deal, but really it's only a 2-year deal. And so we can move on if this doesn't work and just cut bait. And in the larger picture of quarterback money, it's not that much. If you go look at the rest of the quarterback contracts, so you've got a bunch of people who make more money than him. And then you've got Malik and Justin Fields sitting there at 22 and 20 per. And then you've got the rookies. And then the only other non-rookies that are in there are guys like Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson, who Aaron didn't have a market when he came back. That was them or nobody, right, with Pittsburgh. And I also think that they're at a point in their career where it's arrow pointing down. And we're just hoping that we can like make the most of the things that you can still do well and put you in a position, but we kind of know what it is. In this particular case, it's flipped because we literally don't know. And that's what people are paying for, is to find out. Like if you're paying to find out whether or not what we saw from him in those handful of games in the last 2 years with Green Bay, which looked good, is that who you are? Is that what we're going to get? Like, so it's not necessarily an arrow up, but it is an arrow up from where he was in Tennessee. Because it looks like for whatever reason in Green Bay, he looked a lot better than what we saw in, the few times we saw him in Tennessee. So like, let's take a chance. And then you're paying for what it could be if it hits.
I guess like, here's the delineation of what I'm thinking here. It's like, number one, do you think they will not be in the draft quarterback market next year with Malik Willis as quarterback?
That they will not be in the quarterback. I think it fully depends on what he looks like this year. Like if he comes out and he looks very good, like this is a franchise quarterback, then I think that you pull that resource back and you put your draft resources in other areas. Much like, for instance, the Saints are a perfect example. Differently, but Tyler Shuck was not a guy that they had much invested in this year. Like they didn't use a high pick on him. If he had not worked out, that's fine. But the fact that he kind of looked like maybe we can work with this. So let's not use our resources on that. And now you're not rebuilding from the quarterback, you're rebuilding around the quarterback. And now there's still time for him to not work out, in which case you can circle back to it. But let's put other people around him in the short term. I think Malik gives you that as a possibility if you're Miami.
but he's costing $20 million more. That's like kind of the point I'm getting at. It's like,
But
if you,
I think it's like we're talking about this like the money is real. Like it's, you know, like 20 million for a quarterback when you're looking at 60 million, 50 million, 45 million, like the number of like we're talking about Daniel Jones, perfect example. What are we going to pay Daniel Jones? What is Daniel Jones making? Like if you're going to go pay Daniel Jones what we're talking about paying him in Indy, then this is like, is he that much better than what Malik Willis might possibly be?
I think I'd say yes. I think because like he won 8 games last year. Like here's
I know,
kind
but
of my,
that's just because you saw it. But like a year ago, you didn't know that. A
Yeah,
year
but
ago, you're coming off of
a year ago he was getting 2% less percentage of cap, and he also was getting paid at like $11 million. Like he was getting paid he was getting, like, you could have signed 2 good guards or like a guard and a safety for that. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, if your win total is 4.5 and you sign Malik Willis and you're paying $20 million, a sum that we've only seen a collection of people who have started a lot of games and been given up on: Jameis Winston, Justin Fields, Daniel Jones. It's really kind of it. Or really, really old guys, Tom Brady, Ben Roethlisberger. Like, the only one of those that has worked out is Daniel Jones. He's getting paid substantially less. And so it's just like this weird market that it's like, we're going to stink and we're going to have a $20 million quarterback. And it's just like, I can't wrap my head, like, just let Quinn Ewers play. Or like you said, go draft the quarterback in the 2nd or 3rd round, like Tyler Shuck, see if you have something there. Because like the idea that you're going to tank, but not try to build the team up for the quarterback, like you're going to spend that money on a quarterback, doesn't make sense to me.
I don't think they're tanking. Okay, then I agree with you. That makes no sense. It makes no sense if you are purposefully trying to finish in last place so that you can go get Arch Manning or whoever your guy is next year. Then this makes no sense to pay this much money for him. Then you put yourself in the position that the Cardinals are putting themselves in, and you just go, we'll take whoever's left over, and we'll just throw our hands up in the air. And we probably won't sell tickets, and this will be a tough year for our fans. But like the path is clear. I don't believe that they are attempting to do that. At least not actively. I think that they're taking the middle of the road here, where they're like, let's pay enough that we might find an answer. We think it's possible that he's going to be a good quarterback. Possible. But if he's not, then we have an alternate path, which is that's okay too. But if he is, and we have a $20 million quarterback, then now we have like something that we can work around here, and we can put some pieces around it. I think maybe that's where we're getting hung up here in our conversation, is that you see this as an active tank, and I just don't. And in that sense, I do think if I looked at it that way, this would not make sense. It would not make sense to pay $20 million to have somebody try to lose.
Yeah, that definitely kind of explains it a little bit. I guess, like, to add a little context, there's 2 elements that I think we haven't discussed based on this topic that I think are relevant to bring up. The first is that this could be completely us looking at the public data and the Packers brass having some knowledge, particularly in between the relationship between the general manager and the head coach, of thinking we would have just started Malik Willis over Jordan Love. And that being their opinion, having been around him for 2 years, and we just don't know that. And if that's the case, like, I'm just going to be flat dead wrong.
There is something to be said for the fact that these are people from Green Bay that were like, go get our guy.
Yeah. And if that's the case, I'm just like pure D, flat D, dead wrong. But if that's the case, like, I feel like his market would have been higher more generally. So it's tough to say. The second element of this, and again, like, I'm taking this both from an analytical draft, super edgy point of view, talking about like, just go draft someone, just go take a shot in the draft, etc. But I'm also viewing this from like the cap perspective of like what typically makes markets. And we've seen the market create minimum guys who have been really good on winning teams, that have like kind of like the Phoenix quarterback market, which is brand new. Geno, Baker Mayfield, etc. And then we've seen the top of the line guys who kind of like stack up around each other. And whether you're in that Purdy purview, what used to be the Tua purview golf, or you're like a top of the market Dak whatever Josh Allen guy, but they're all kind of close together and they're way, 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 way up there, substantially more than everyone else. The only person in this market is Justin Fields. And the New York Jets feel like they're in a similar spot as the Dolphins were last year. And so, like, why was the comp Justin Fields? Like, was the agent coming in and be like, oh, just give us the Justin Fields contract? Well, that contract was a purity failure. So it's just like, if that did not work, how is it going to work for you? Like that, there's just these elements bouncing around.
It's just there's a clear in between. There's a clear in between from a contract standpoint, and it's probably has nothing to do with Justin Fields and more to do with going top of rookies and end of road veterans.
Yep.
And the actual starters. So I see it more as we're coming in at the bottom of the starting salaries that are not rookie deals and going there. And you're going to try to probably go on top of Justin Fields for the reasons that you said.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting market. And I'm like happy to say that, like, hope these guys continue getting paid. Will Levis, do not step on a field next year, buddy, because I know what's coming for you. And it's like $24 million if you play 1 or 2 good games. But it's like, it's just an interesting kind of wheel deal of like, you're probably not going to get the actual $20 million value out of it. But you know you have a quarterback for next year. So does the surplus even actually matter? But also, like, this market exists with people that we're not quite sure, but also we don't have a lot of data on Malik Willis. So it could have a really, really right tail where, you know, he could be one of the best players in the league. So it's just like a fascinating discussion from every view. And to be fair, I do think it's probably fairish market value. I just wonder if like the actual, you know, average or 25th percentile, 75th percentile of the outcomes actually is around $20 million.
When you say Will Levis don't step on a field, why is that? Because you think the only situations left are ones where no quarterback's going to really succeed, and so be the backup for one more year and then be that Phoenix guy next season, be the Malik Willis next season?
Yeah, I think what we're kind of proving here is that if this is going to be the lower Phoenix guy, the guy who hasn't proven himself yet, then the best guy should get $20 to $25 million a year, or 7 to 7.5% of the cap every year as a result. And I don't see another, you know, candidate for that other than Will Levis right now.
Quick update on the Eric DaCosta press conference. He said that Trey Hendrickson being available in free agency had no influence on them backing out of the Max Crosby deal. He said he's gutted that they couldn't get a deal done with Crosby. Said that after losing their starting center, Tyler Linderbaum, to the Raiders, they were interested in pairing together Trey Hendrickson and Max Crosby. Crosby's medical exam put an end to that discussion. Kate, let me just real quick. How would they have done that? Because they were with Crosby's contract on the books, they were what, 12 over the cap, 12 million? So like how are they then the one that goes, let's make another splash and bring in another one of the most highly paid edge rushers? How is that even a possible conversation?
I'm looking at Lamar Jackson's contract. He currently has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So he already has 5 years. So void years or restructuring, re-signing. I don't know exactly how that would have worked. Who else is highly paid? Who else is highly paid on that team? I don't know. It's a good question. Like maybe Ronnie Stanley. Like I'm assuming they've already done all the cap gymnastics. So it's like it could have been done, I'm sure. But that's crazy to me that was going to be the move, because that's like, I mean, we have never seen the Ravens go that all in before, ever.
Does this, if they can't do that, then does that tell us something about a draft plan? Like, if you're thinking this is such a priority for us, let's do this, then we're going to bring in Max and Trey in the same offseason, and then go, oh man, bummer, can't do Max. Like,
if I'm a general manager in this league, I'm calling the Ravens immediately. And I'm asking for draft picks. I'm asking if they want to move up. I'm asking if they are interested in, if I'm the Dolphins or you know, the Dolphins have been moving off of guys. I'm trying to think of some other teams that had people that relatively could have been moved. Like, saying
who?
publicly,
Yeah,
I
that you
none
wanted
of,
this.
yeah, that you wanted Trey Hendrickson and Max Crosby, and assumptively that means Trey Hendrickson on the deal. If it really didn't mean anything, like I'm shooting them a call and asking them, hey, Arizona Cardinals, like, can I interest you in Buda Baker? Can I interest you in some of these other guys on my team? For two first and a third, like, because it seems like they're going like all in, Ram style all in, which they've never done ever, like really ever. So it's really fascinating that this is the pivot, especially after, John Harbaugh was let go, which we thought this was kind of like a top-down ownership GM, massive front office, massive analytics group, well-respected scouts. Ozzy's still involved. Like Harbaugh's part of that crew. We thought that was the case, and it seems as if it's just like time to make some philosophical changes up in here, which is really, really interesting to me. Like I didn't think we were going to get anything out of this press conference. Yeah, if what he's saying is true, this is extremely intriguing.
I want the Lions to do that.
Lions trade for Max?
Yes. I mean, I'm just saying, like, but like if the Ravens are looking at this, like, let's put two of them on the edges. This is what I've been saying for the last few years. Why don't you do that in Detroit? Go put him on the other side of Hutchinson and just bye. Like,
yeah, and I guess we'll truly figure out the value of the defensive backfield versus the edge rushers with that team.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. Let's talk really quickly about the running backs, because I think that there is something that, you and I kind of had a little bit of misunderstanding in terms of how we interpreted the Malik Willis. I think that the running back signings in free agency are a perfect example of both of us reading the room differently than we are hearing it is being read by others. Like the Saints going out and signing Travis Etienne, which you are going to say, how do you say his name? Etienne. So that's what we're going to have to get.
I wonder if it's going to be official. The media guide is going to be a must read for Sammy B when that comes out, because I wonder if he's just going to switch it back because he's in New Orleans now.
Go all Cajun on us. And then the Chiefs bringing in Kenneth Walker. So these two teams that had been mentioned in the Jeremiah Love draft conversation prior to this week went and signed free agents instead. You and I think both looked at that as, they're going to use that pick to do something different. Or at least I'll speak for myself. For the Chiefs, I'm like, I would prefer, if we're going to bring in an offensive weapon rather than use your high first on a running back, I'd rather you bring in a wide receiver. You could get an edge, you could get a corner, you could get like a number of different things that from a positional value standpoint make a lot more sense to me that high in the draft. The same could be said for the Saints. If you can check that box at a relatively low cost, even though you're paying more for a free agent running back than you would for like a rookie running back or something like that, it's still so relatively low compared to the rest of the league that even if you do go close to top of market, it's still so inexpensive. Check that box there and then free up that draft pick to use on a positional value guy. There were other people who looked at this and said, this is proof that they know he wouldn't even be there for them to pick, because he's coming off the board in the first 7 picks.
I think
how are we this misaligned?
I think technically both can be true. It just wouldn't, if that is the case. Like I don't know what. There's a couple of items with running backs that I think pertains to this. Number one, you're not going to get a lot of surplus value unless it's a high variance player, a Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, a guy who is a third or fourth or fifth or sixth or seventh round pick that you don't have to pay anything, or a not even Javonte Williams, like a guy who you just kind of pick up off the free agency waiver wire, who's on a minimum contract and then all of a sudden has a really, really good season. Like that's really the only way you can get good surplus value. And those guys, you're not sure if they're going to be good until they're in the building. And so you can't really have an acquisition strategy based on that unless you just really, really trust your scouts. And even so, you're not going to, heavily believe in that guy and heavily put a lot of weight on him as a result. The second portion is, if that is true, if you're never going to get a lot of surplus value, in order to get a lot of offensive value, you probably need to be a good offense, or at least have a good setup of an offense. The Chiefs and the Saints, we believe, both have that. And so the third element here is that the draft provides you cheap access to massive surplus value that free agency does not. So all that to be said, let's say that Jeremiah Love is considered, like, in fact, the average for Jeremiah Love, should he be picked in the top 10, is around the contracts that these guys are getting, around $14 million. So on average, these two players are similar. One you can get in free agency and just pay. And the other one you can pay, and you have opportunity cost of a Carnell Tate, a Mekhi Lemon, who could potentially provide you $30 million to $20 million extra dollars in surplus value. So why wouldn't you just spend the same amount of money for a guy who probably has a smaller standard deviation you feel like can be good, than spending that same amount of money for a player who is causing you opportunity cost for everything else? And that is why going out, if you believe you have a good offense, very key. If you believe you have a good offensive line and a good offense, Brett Coleman, friend of the show, has done a very good job of kind of editorializing this, in particular with the Philadelphia Eagles, on his channel, which you can find on YouTube. But if you believe you have a good offense, it makes more sense to go out and try to spend money on a veteran guy, because number one, you think on, like, the standard deviation is going to be smaller. You think they're going to be, you kind of know what they are. And then third, you don't want to give up that opportunity cost down the line in the first round for a guy who could potentially be better at a position that is more pricey. So that is why it makes financial sense what the Chiefs and the Saints did with respect to just going out and drafting Jeremiah Love, or, God forbid, trading up to draft Jeremiah Love.
You know what? I found out yesterday when doing a deep dive about this subject matter, Sam, that surprised even me. The Falcons rushed for fewer yards the year after they drafted Bijan in the first round than they did the year before they drafted him. When Tyler Algier was their primary back, they rushed for more rushing yards that year than they did in Bijan's first year. The rush EPA went down in Bijan's first year. For Ashton Jeanty. Ashton Jeanty. Same is true. The rushing yards went down from the year before. The rush EPA went down from the year before. So, like, there's so many layers to this conversation where you and I get into, like, the positional value and the surplus value and, like, all of that stuff. Maybe the most basic support of why you don't draft a running back in round one is because you're going to put him on a bad team, at least if you're drafting him at the top of the round. And those guys, like Alshon Jeffrey, also not impacting the run game. Thanks, Stopsky. Where did that come from? The names are somewhat, similar. They didn't even make their ground game better. And we, by the way, concede 100% very special talents. Both of those guys, very good running backs. They're clearly better running backs in a vacuum. If you just went and observed them in any way, like, we're going to say they're a better running back than the alternative that they had the year before. Yes, but it didn't have the impact even on their rushing yards. It wasn't even like, and we can have a separate conversation about how important it is to have a ton of rushing yards, whatever. Like, but what is the impact? Like, you have to put those guys on a team that has lots of other good things, or else even this incredibly talented player won't show you that they're a talented player. It's like you're drafting. I don't even know, like, what the right analogy is. It's like you don't have the ability to make this player look as good as he actually is.
Exactly.
So it's almost wasted.
Exactly. And to be, like you said, Lindsay, like, we are not deniers that running backs are awesome. We're deniers of two things. One, that the running game is more efficient than the passing game, because there's no data to indicate that.
None.
And number two, that you can predict on a year-to-year basis what a running back is going to do. There's no data to indicate that. That is all we're saying here. And so if that variance is large, and we know it's even larger college to pro, it makes a lot more sense to spend the same money on a veteran guy, even if they don't work out, which is like a difficult thing to maintain. And the Saints very well may fall in love with the running back in round 3, 4, 5. We saw him do that last year anyway, and he produced a little bit, the running back from Kansas. Like, it just the first round is not a place for a running back. And if you do want premium running back talent, you can get them in free agency. We've seen it time and time again. You can get them via trades as well. Like, you can get them in the market, and it's not always worth it. It'll be for the most part worth it.
This is a comment that I think is a valid observation to make here. Rookies are usually bad.
Put that on the t-shirt.
but it's worth highlighting that, because that's not what this is about.
Yeah. Ironically,
Ashton
with the
Jeanty
running backs in the top 15. Yeah.
Ashton Jeanty was good.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't like, offensive linemen. We hear this about quarterbacks. Like, sometimes it just takes a minute to get used to playing in the league. And there are certain things that, like, there's a development arc. You need to get used to your environment. And that's probably true to a degree. I'm sure every running back would say that that's true to a degree about running behind their offensive line, getting a feel for their timing, when they're going to open up that space. Like, it's a rhythm and a chemistry, and like, but I don't think that that's what this is. This is their production numbers reflecting the environment that they're in. If Jeanty had gone to a team picking 31st or 29th, if you'd put him on a good team, he would have different production numbers from last year. Like, it just would have looked different. This is the Saquon Barkley conversation. We talk about this so much, too much. Mm-hmm. But Saquon Barkley, when he went to the Eagles from the Giants, his numbers skyrocketed. And the reason why was because he went to a good team.
Right.
That's like, it wasn't because he didn't have that in him in New York. And if he had stayed in New York, New York would have got that out of him. It's a reflection of environment. Mm-hmm. So I'm at the point now too. And I'm like, obviously not everybody is in the same silos of conversations that we're in, but I tweeted out the other day, because there was a tweet that about the Saints and the Kansas City Chiefs, their moves in free agency, and this meaning that general managers know. Everyone knows the general managers. What's clear here is that he's going to go before them, and that they weren't even going to have an opportunity. And I didn't even know where to start, because it feels like, just as a concept, you have to go back and start at square one. Like, are we having a conversation completely from ground zero? Yes. This is, if your O-line sucks, you can't draft a running back
exactly
in a couple rounds. That's it. Like, there's more to it. There's lots of it. When I say that's it, like, I fully understand this is not a simple concept. It's not a one line and that explains it all. But like, if there is a line that explains it all, that's it. If your O-line sucks, you cannot do it. Like, just don't.
Yeah.
If your quarterback sucks, don't bother.
And
it
doesn't
do what you think it does.
I think that's why it's such an interesting conversation, in particular with the Chiefs, because the Saints are kind of like near out of the cap situation they put themselves in the Breeze years. The Chiefs are still in, we're competing every year. We're going all in every year, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have Patrick Mahomes. And so, in particular with the Chiefs, you believe that Trey Smith and Creed Humphrey can have a successful run game. We've seen them do it literally every year.
Yeah.
You have Patrick Mahomes, so the offense should be pretty good. It was one of the best offenses in the league last year. So it would make sense to add a running back as a result, because they already have everything else. Now, do they have a wide receiver? Not necessarily, but the offense is going to be good. It does not make sense for them at 9, who with a cap and cash strapped team, to use that money on a player that is not going to save them money. And that's like the core element that can put this in relief, is that you would have to pay the same amount or around the same amount for Jeremiah Love, even at 9, as you would have for Kenneth Walker. The difference is there's a gap of potentially $10 to $15 million if that player is even a wide receiver 2 at the wide receiver, or even your second edge rusher on the defensive back on the defensive side of the ball, that you can get that you can't get at the running back position. That's the core element. And there's a greater discussion to be had about this. And I think people really realize this, and we saw it in free agency with the linebacker position, because everyone's talking about Sonny Styles. Is he the third best player in this draft at his position? Is he going to go in the top 10? He's an absolute athletic freak. You can go get Demario Davis, who was a borderline all-pro for the past 10 years, for $11 million for 1 year. You can go get a bunch of these other younger guys for $8 to $10 million. It's the same exact thing as the running back position, except we see people investing substantially more in the linebacker position than we do with the running back position. Devin Lloyd, another great example, $15 million. Quay Walker, 13.5. Caden Ellis, going back to New Orleans, 11. There's just so many guys at the linebacker position that why does it make sense to go draft Sonny Styles if he's just going to be a middle linebacker for you? It's a really tough decision when it comes down to that.
God, this offseason's so fun because it's such a weird one, right? Like it's just in terms of what is needed and what is out there and all of the positional value stuff. We get to have some of these conversations that we like and have been having for years. Has there been anything else in free agency that stood out to you about like where the market is?
Yeah, I think you got to look at the wide receiver position with regards to Alec Pierce is like one thing that just absolutely caught my eye, because he now has as much guaranteed money as DK Metcalf. He is the 4th highest paid wide receiver in terms of guarantee at signing, according to Spot Track. So we'll have to dig deeper into this deal when everything comes through. A lot of people are just calling it the Brandon Ayuk signing plus some, but Ayuk was only guaranteed $45 million. There's a fundamental difference in how this was negotiated. And if you want to say wide receivers of this caliber never hit free agency, so you got to go pay him, that makes sense.
What is that caliber? Because I think he's an interesting one. Like, he's not one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. Like, we're not having Puka JSN conversations about him. We're not adding him to that tier. So, like, where is he? And then the market paid him because he was available and he's good enough, but he feels specific in the ways in which he's good.
To delineate that, Lindsay, he is a extremely high average depth of target player who has target share. And there's 2 of those in the league. There's been 2 of those in the last 5 years in the league. It's been him and Christian Watson. That's it. We haven't seen it other than that. So that leads me to believe that is not sustainable. Tough to say. We've seen Shane Steichen, win 8 games with Andy Richardson, Daniel Jones, Joe Flacco, Gardner Minshew. So who am I to say that? It just immediate question mark for me of okay, why are we guaranteeing this guy $60 million when we haven't really seen Brandon Ayuk get that? And he was an all-pro. DK Metcalf is the market for that, also an all-pro. CeeDee Lamb, $67 million at the time. That would obviously be higher now. But yeah, multi-time all-pro. He's in Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson world, A.J. Brown world. We're talking about all guys who made all-pro teams. And I don't think Alec Pierce was really even did you consider Alec Pierce with one of your all-pro votes?
No. But I mean, no. but I think he's very good.
Yeah.
But he's not in that, not in that sense. Not on that tier. Not in that conversation, I suppose. The other thing there is I feel like for the last few years, thank you, Stopsky. Stopsky just desperately wants to be involved in this conversation, but I actually like the fact that he doesn't have a voice and he just has to barge in graphically whenever he wants to. I think there's an element to the Colts wide receiver room and the way that it's played out in the last couple of years that has felt very, who's the quarterback this week? I look at wide receivers oftentimes through a fantasy lens, or at least that's part of the way that I look at them through. The Packers, it's funny you mentioned Christian Watson, are definitely a room like this. Whose week is it? What does the matchup dictate? There isn't a guy this is your wide receiver 1. There's no clear and obvious structure. There's no clear and obvious against this team, this guy's going to have a big week against this type of corner. Like it's hard to predict, which can be a strength of your offense. Hint, whoever you didn't start in fantasy that week, that's who's going to blow up. For the Packers, that's true. But for the Colts, it feels like it was tied very much to who their quarterback was and the differences between the style of play when they flip-flop, because they've done a lot of back and forth at quarterback in the last few years. So if you've got a quarterback that's like an Anthony Richardson, who's taking shots downfield and he's not really doing a lot of the short accuracy is not his jam. And so we're not really like that's cut out. Then the wide receivers who play that role in an offense, they're sort of cut out from a fantasy standpoint, but like an Alec Pierce can thrive. It just differs and based on who your quarterback is. So I feel like it's interesting that they pay him all this much money when we got a really narrow window in which to actually evaluate who he is in a best case scenario offense.
Exactly. And I think we're talking about who is the quarterback. What is George Pickens worth now? Like, is George Pickens going to get around what CeeDee Lamb is making now? Is that what's
that was
in the
probably going to happen anyway?
Yeah. And it's just and then like to kind of conclude here about like the general reason why I'm freaking out about the guarantee is like when agents and cap folks come together in order to negotiate a contract, Chase Falavine, who's our cap expert here, who gave excellent advice to folks at Tulane, calls it the three-legged stool. It's about the 2-year cash flow. How much money are you expecting to pay in the next 2 years? Because that affects how you're going to manage your cap. It's about the guaranteed money out in total. And it's about how many years are you under control. So there's some teams like the Lions who typically the guarantees are low, but they extend guys. They just consistently extend guys. And you kind of see that with the Eagles as well. They're early to the market. And so the fact that, it's 4 years, it's a standard 4-year re-sign for Alec Pierce. And the average salary really isn't that bad, 28.5. That is kind of like it's similar to Brandon Ayuk, but the guarantee is so much higher. The third element of the three-pronged stool is like, whoa, what happened here? Like, and it happened with DK Metcalf too. So maybe this is the new world for wide receivers. If we saw it with DK and we saw it with Alec Pierce, it's just like a stark occurrence within particular those two players when Jamar Chase, very strange circumstance with the Bengals, was at $73 million just a year ago.
Let's circle back to where we started. Do you think that Max Crosby is a Raider week 1?
No.
It's such a weird story though, right? Because of how this all came about and him wanting out. And now can you put him back? The whole thing is just so stinking weird. You don't think so?
I think there's two elements to this. I don't think there's oddly going to be any harsh feelings between the Raiders and Max, because it seemed as if this was an open discussion between them. And they were like, hey, we're going to send you a team that has the absolute highest win total in the league next year. Like, you're going to get a chance to win. You're going to be a beloved. Like, I don't think it was a trade where it's like, I need out. No, you don't, etc. I think it was like a work together type trade. The reason why is there's going to be a team that thinks the market's down, and it's going to be like, we are not worried about the meniscus at all. And like,
frankly, I think
that's fine. And perhaps
have you seen those guys?
I'm saying this is coming out of my mouth right now. If we're to believe Eric DaCosta, why? And like, excellent conclusion here. Like, resetting myself here. We heard from John Idzik and Mike McCagnon that this is a multi-year consideration at that medical. It is not just 1 year. Then we heard from Eric DaCosta that they wanted to put Trey Hendrickson and Max Crosby together. That indicates to me that the Ravens were looking at it for 1 year. That actually scares me about the Max Crosby medical, because that means that the medical was not good for 1 year. If they were planning to just go all out, Trey Hendrickson, $60 million 2-year cash. It's basically a 1-year deal. We're paying him a ton. We're bringing in Max Crosby. We're going to win the Super Bowl this year. We don't care. Like, that scares me a little bit about the medical, given all the information we had. If I didn't have any of that information beforehand, I am calling the Raiders immediately.
So then the question becomes, where's the bar? Going back to what I was asking before, like how low can you go with where it's still worth it? Because I think what's also weird here, and this isn't necessarily something that the front office is taking into consideration, but like Max has been a favorite of the Raiders fans, and Raiders fans are not a monolith. Like everybody reacted differently. Some people were sad, some people were like, bye. But there was a lot of don't let the door hit you on the way out. Like, look what we got. Like celebrating the haul. And so it just feels weird to reset and be like, now buy his jersey. Like I don't, but I mean, you can always reframe things from a PR standpoint. You can get him back on board and you can, put him in this defense that now looks a lot better. Understood. But like there's some stuff that needs to get worked out there. And then I think, again, I keep saying it. I think the thing that really answers this is what kind of offers are they getting? And what is like what they have to get, because there have been reports today they're still holding on to the 2 firsts. I don't know that you're going to get 2 firsts off of this.
Yeah, that doesn't seem to be the case anymore.
So we'll see. Looking forward to the Raiders trade graphic saying they got Max Crosby from the Ravens. What are you talking about, Stopsky? Please now, I would like to see your face as we say goodbye.
Hi. Oh, it's the same, like reframing. Like we got him back. It's the whole deal. Listen, I'm just trying to not think about the Giants drafting Jeremiah Love at 5. All right, that's what we're trying to get through at this point.
Yep. Because of course the run game was the problem last year, right? Like that's how you should use that.
Yeah, they were top 5 in rushing. If we were 3 though, we would have had 10 wins. That's the 6-win difference.
Want to watch Sofsky go away really fast? Does this mean Scatterbo's not okay?
Au revoir.
Thanks for being with us, guys. I appreciate you as we go through all of these free agency fallout moves. We're back again next week with more SumerSports Show.